Chapter 47. The Council of the Musketeers. As Athos had foreseen, the bastion was only occupied by about a dozen dead bodies, French and Rocheleois. "Gentlemen," said Athos, who had taken the command of the expedition, "whilst Grimaud prepares the table, let us begin by gathering together the muskets and ammunition. We can, moreover, converse whilst we are doing it. These gentlemen," added he, pointing to the dead bodies, "do not hear us." "But we may, nevertheless, throw them into the ditches," said Porthos, "having first satisfied ourselves that they have nothing in their pockets." "Yes," replied Athos, "but that is Grimaud's affair." "Well, then," said D'Artagnan, "let Grimaud search them and throw them over the walls." "Not upon any account," said Athos, "that they may be of any use to us." "These dead be of any use to us?" exclaimed Porthos. "Ah, nonsense, you're going crazy, my dear friend." "Do not judge rashly, say both the gospel and the cardinal," replied Athos. "How many muskets are there, gentlemen?" 12. "How much ammunition?" 100 rounds. "It is quite as many as we need. Let us load our muskets." The four companions set themselves to work, and just as they had loaded the last musket, Grimaud made a sign to them that breakfast was ready. Athos indicated by a gesture that he was contented with what was done, and then pointed out to Grimaud a sort of sheltered box, where he was to place himself as sentinel. But to relieve the tedium of his watch, Athos allowed him to take with him a loaf, 2 cutlets, and a bottle of wine. "And now to breakfast," said Athos. The four friends squatted upon the ground like Turks or tailors. "And now," said D'Artagnan, "as you are no longer afraid of being heard, I hope that you're going to let us know your secret." "I hope that I provide you at the same time both with amusement and glory, gentlemen," said Athos. "I have induced you to take a charming little excursion. Here is a most sustaining breakfast, and below there are 500 persons, as you may perceive through the embrasures, who take us for madmen or heroes, 2 classes of fools who very much resemble each other. But the secret? I saw her ladyship last night," said Athos. D'Artagnan was just conveying his glass to his lips, but at the sound of her ladyship's name his hand trembled, so that he placed his glass upon the ground in order that he might not spill its contents. "You have seen your wife—" "Hush, then," interrupted Athos. "You forget, my dear fellow, that these gentlemen are not like you, initiated in the privacies of my family affairs. I have seen her ladyship." "And where did that happen?" demanded D'Artagnan. "About 2 leagues from hence, at the Red Dovecot." "In that case I'm a lost man," said D'Artagnan. "Not just yet," replied Athos, "for by this time she must have quitted the shores of France." D'Artagnan breathed again. "But after all," inquired Porthos, "who is this lady?" "A charming woman," said Athos, sipping a glass of sparkling wine. "Scamp of a landlord," exclaimed he, "who gives us Anjou for champagne and thinks we shall be deceived by the subterfuge. Yes," continued he, "a charming woman, to whom our friend D'Artagnan has done something unpardonable, for which she has been endeavoring to avenge herself, a month ago by trying to get him shot, a week ago by sending him some poison, and yesterday by demanding his head of the cardinal." "What? Demanding my head of the cardinal?" cried D'Artagnan, pale with terror. "Yes," said Porthos, "it is true as gospel, for I heard her with my own ears." "And I also," said Aramis. "Then," said D'Artagnan, letting his arm fall in a desponding manner, "it is useless to struggle longer. I may as well blow out my brains at once and have done with it." "That is the last folly to be perpetrated," said Athos, "seeing it is the only one which will admit of no remedy." "But with such enemies I shall never escape," said D'Artagnan. "First, my unknown antagonist of Meung, then de Wardes, on whom I inflicted 4 wounds, next this lady whose secret I found out, and lastly the cardinal, whose revenge I defeated." "Well," said Athos, "and all this makes only 4, and we are 4 against 1. Vive Dieu, if we may trust to Grimaud's signs, we are now about to be engaged with a far greater number of foes. What's the matter, Grimaud? Considering the seriousness of the circumstances, I permit you to speak, my friend, but be brief, I beseech you. What do you see?" "A troop." "Of how many persons?" 20 men. What sort of men? 16 pioneers and 4 soldiers. How far off are they? 500 paces. Good, we still have time to finish this fowl and to drink a glass of wine. To your health, D'Artagnan. To your health, repeated Aramis and Porthos. Well, then, to my health, although I do not imagine that your good wishes will be of much benefit to me. Bah, said Athos, God is great, as the Mahometans say, and the future is in his hands. Then, having swallowed his wine and put the glass down, Athos carelessly arose, took the first musket which came to his hand, and went toward an embrasure. The other 3 did the same. As for Grimaud, he had orders to place himself behind them, and to reload their muskets. An instant afterwards they saw the troop appearing. It came along a kind of branch trench, which formed a communication between the bastion and the town. Mordieu, said Athos, it was scarcely worth while to disturb ourselves for a score of fellows armed with pickaxes, mattocks, and spades. Grimaud ought to have quietly waved to them to go about their business, and I'm quite convinced they would have left us to ourselves. I much doubt it, said D'Artagnan, for they come forward with great resolution. Besides, in addition to the workmen, there are 4 soldiers and a brigadier armed with muskets. That is because they've not seen us, replied Athos. Faith, said Aramis, I confess that I am reluctant to fire upon these poor devils of citizens. He is a bad priest, said Porthos, who pities heretics. Upon my word, said Athos, Aramis is right. I will give them a notice. What the plague are you doing? Cried D'Artagnan. You'll get yourself shot, my dear fellow. But Athos paid no attention to this warning, and mounting on the branch, his fusee in one hand and his hat in the other, Gentlemen, said he, bowing courteously and addressing himself to the soldiers and pioneers, who, astonished by this apparition, halted about 50 paces from the bastion. Gentlemen, we are, some of my friends and myself, engaged in breakfasting in this bastion. Now you know that nothing is more disagreeable than to be disturbed at breakfast, so we entreat of you, if you really have business here, to wait till we have finished our repast, or to come back in a little while, unless indeed you experience the salutary desire of forsaking the ranks of rebellion, and coming to drink with us to the health of the King of France. Take care, Athos, said D'Artagnan. Don't you see that they're aiming at you? Yes, said Athos, but these are civilians who are shockingly bad marksmen, and will take care not to hit me. In fact, at that moment 4 shots were fired, and the bullets whistled around Athos, but without one touching him. 4 shots were instantaneously fired in return, but with a far better aim than that of the aggressors. 3 soldiers fell dead, and one of the pioneers was wounded. Grimaud, said Athos from the breach, another musket. Grimaud obeyed immediately. The 3 friends had also reloaded their arms. A second discharge soon followed the first, and the brigadier and 2 pioneers fell dead. The rest of the troop took to flight. Come, gentlemen, a sortie, said Athos. The 4 friends rushed out of the fort, reached the field of battle, picked up the muskets of the soldiers and the half-pike of the brigadier, and, satisfied that the fugitives would never stop till they reached the city, they returned to the bastion, bearing with them the trophies of their victory. Reload the muskets, Grimaud, said Athos, and let us, gentlemen, continue our breakfast and conversation. Where were we? I recollect, said D'Artagnan, you were saying that after having demanded my head of the cardinal, her ladyship had left the shores of France. And where's she going? Added D'Artagnan, who was painfully anxious about the itinerary of the lady's journey. She's going to England, replied Athos. And why? To assassinate the Duke of Buckingham, or to get him assassinated. D'Artagnan uttered an exclamation of surprise and horror. It is infamous, exclaimed he. Oh, as to that, said Athos, I beg you to believe that I concern myself very little about it. Now that you have finished, Grimaud, continued he, take the half-pike of our brigadier, fasten a napkin to it, and fix it on the end of our bastion, that those rebellious Rocheleois may see that they are opposed to brave and loyal subjects of the king. Grimaud obeyed without reply, and an instant afterwards the white flag floated over the heads of the 4 friends. A cry of joy, a thunder of applause, saluted its appearance. Half the camp was at the barriers. What, said D'Artagnan, you concern yourself but little about her assassinating Buckingham, or causing him to be assassinated? The Duke is our friend. The Duke is an Englishman. The Duke fights against us. Let her do, therefore, what she likes with the Duke. I care as little about him as about an empty bottle. As Athos said this, he threw, some 15 yards before him, a bottle which he held in his hand, and from which he had just poured the last drop into his own glass. Wait an instant, said D'Artagnan. I do not abandon Buckingham in that manner. He gave us some very fine horses. And especially some very beautiful saddles, added Porthos, who was then wearing the lace of his upon his cloak. Besides, said Aramis, God wishes for the conversion, not death, of a sinner. Amen, said Athos, and we will return to that by and by, if such is your pleasure. But that which most engaged my attention at the time, and I am sure you will understand why, D'Artagnan, was how to take from this woman a carte blanche, which she had extorted from the cardinal, and by means of which she might get rid of you, and perhaps the whole of us, with impunity. This creature is a very demon, said Porthos, holding his plate to Aramis, who was cutting up a fowl. And this document, said D'Artagnan, did it remain in her hands? No, it passed into mine. I cannot say that it was without some trouble, for if I said that, I should tell a lie. My dear Athos, said D'Artagnan, I must no longer count the times I owe my life to you. Then it was to visit her that you quitted us, said Aramis. Exactly so. And you have got the cardinal's letter, inquired D'Artagnan. Here it is, replied Athos. He took the precious paper from the pocket of his coat. D'Artagnan unfolded it with a hand of which he did not attempt to hide the tremor, and read, It is by my order and for the good of the state that the bearer of this did that which he has now done. Richelieu. It is, in fact, a regular indulgence, said Aramis. We must destroy this paper, said D'Artagnan, who seemed to read in it his own sentence of death. On the contrary, replied Athos, it must be most scrupulously preserved, and I would not give it up for the gold that would cover it in coin. And what will she do now? Inquired D'Artagnan. Why, said Athos carelessly, she will probably write to the cardinal that a cursed musketeer named Athos took her safeguard from her by force, and she will at the same time advise his eminence to get rid of him and also of his two friends, Porthos and Aramis. The cardinal will recollect that these are the very men that are always in his way. Then, some fine morning, he will have D'Artagnan arrested, and, that he may not be annoyed by solitude, will send us to keep him company in the Bastille. Ah, then, said Porthos, I think you're cracking somewhat melancholy jokes. I'm not joking, replied Athos. Do you know, said Porthos, that I fancy it would be less of a crime to twist this cursed lady's neck than those of these poor devils of Huguenots, who have never committed any greater crime than singing in French the very psalms which we sing in Latin. What does the abbé say to that? Quietly asked Athos. I say that I am quite of Porthos's opinion. And I also, said D'Artagnan. Happily, she's far away, added Porthos, for I confess that she would annoy me much here. She annoys me in England as well as in France, said Athos. She annoys me everywhere, said D'Artagnan. But when you had her in your power, said Porthos, why did you not drown, strangle, or hang her? It's only the dead who never return. Do you think so, Porthos? Replied Athos with a dark smile which D'Artagnan alone could understand. I have an idea, said D'Artagnan. Let us hear it, cried the Musketeers. To arms! Exclaimed Grimaud. The young men arose hastily and ran to their muskets. This time there was a small band advancing, composed of 20 or 25 men, no longer pioneers but soldiers of the garrison. Suppose we now return to the camp, said Porthos. It seems to me that the match is not equal. Impossible for 3 reasons, answered Athos. The first is because we have not finished our breakfast. The second, because we have still some important affairs to talk about. And the third, that it wants yet 10 minutes before the hour is elapsed. All the same, said Aramis, we must arrange a plan of battle. It is vastly simple, replied Athos. As soon as the enemy is within musket shot, we must fire. If he continues to advance, we must fire again. In fact, we must blaze away as long as we have guns loaded. If the remnant of the band should then wish to mount the assault, we must let the besiegers descend as far as the ditch, and then we must heave on their heads a large mass of the wall, which only stays up now by a miracle of equilibrium." "Bravo!" exclaimed Porthos. "Athos, you are undoubtedly born to be a general, and the cardinal, who thinks himself a great warrior, is mere nothing to you." "Gentlemen," said Athos, "do not waste your ammunition, I beseech you. Let each pick out his man." "I've got mine," said D'Artagnan. "And I mine," said Porthos. "And I the same," said Aramis. "Fire!" cried Athos. The 4 guns made but one report, and 4 men fell. The drum then beat, and the little band advanced to the charge. The shots of the 4 friends were then fired without regularity, but invariably with the same deadly effect. Yet, as though they had known the numerical weakness of their opponents, the Rochefoucauld continued to advance at a quick pace. At 3 other reports, 2 men fell, yet the march of those who remained unwounded did not slacken. Having reached the foot of the bastion, there were still 12 or 15 of the enemy. A last discharge received, but did not arrest them. They leaped into the ditch and prepared to scale the breach. "Now, my friends," said Athos, "let us finish them at one blow. To the wall! To the wall!" And the 4 friends, assisted by Grimaud, set themselves to topple over with the barrels of their muskets an enormous mass of wall, which bowed as though the wind waved it, and loosening itself from its foundation, fell with a tremendous crash into the ditch. A fearful cry was then heard, a cloud of dust ascended toward the skies, and that was all. "Can we have crushed them all from the first to the last?" said Athos. "Faith, it looks very like it," replied D'Artagnan. "No," said Porthos, "there are 2 or 3 of them escaping, quite crippled." In fact, 3 or 4 of these unfortunate beings, covered with mire and blood, fled along the hollow way and regained the town. They were all the survivors of the little band. Athos looked at his watch. "Gentlemen," said he, "we've been here an hour, and now the wager is gained. But we must be good players besides. D'Artagnan has not yet told us his idea." And the musketeer, with his habitual coolness, seated himself before the remains of the breakfast. "Would you like to hear my plan?" said D'Artagnan to his 3 companions, when, after the alarm which he had so fearful a termination for the little troop of Rochefoucauld, the quartet had resumed their places before the remnants of their meal. "Yes," replied Athos, "you said that I had an idea." "Ah, I have it," exclaimed D'Artagnan. "I will go to England for the 2nd time, will find his Grace of Buckingham and warn him of the plot which he has been concocted against his life." "You will do no such thing, D'Artagnan," said Athos coldly. "Why not? Did I not go before?" "Yes, but at that time we were not at war. At that time the Duke of Buckingham was an ally and not an enemy. What you now suggest would amount to treason." D'Artagnan understood the force of this reasoning and was silent. "But," said Porthos, "I fancy that I, in my turn, have also got an idea." "Silence for Monsieur Porthos's idea," cried Aramis. "I will ask leave of absence of Monsieur de Tréville, on any pretext whatsoever that you can suggest. I am not very clever at excuses myself. The lady does not know me. I will get near her without exciting her alarm, and when I've found the beauty, I will strangle her." "Ah," said Athos, "I'm really somewhat disposed to adopt Porthos's idea." "Fie, then," exclaimed Aramis. "Kill a woman? No, listen, I have the right idea." "Let us have your idea," said Athos, who felt much deference for the young musketeer. "We must announce it to the queen." "Ah, faith, yes," cried D'Artagnan and Porthos together. "I believe that we've found the true course at last." "Announce it to the queen?" said Athos. "And how can we do that? Have we any friends at court? Can we send anyone to Paris without being known in the camp? There are 140 leagues between here and Paris, and our letter will not have reached Angers before we ourselves shall be in dungeons." "As for getting a letter safely delivered to the queen," said Aramis, blushing, "I myself will undertake it. I know a very skillful person at Tours." Aramis stopped on seeing Athos smile. "Well, will you not adopt this plan, Athos?" inquired D'Artagnan. "I do not entirely reject it," replied Athos, "but I would merely observe to Aramis that he cannot himself leave the camp, and that with anybody but one of ourselves, there will be no security that 2 hours after the messenger has started, all the Capuchins, all the alguazils, all the black bonnets of the cardinal will not know your letter by heart, and that you and your very skillful person will not be immediately arrested. Without calculating, added Porthos, that the Queen would save the Duke of Buckingham while leaving us to our fate. Gentlemen, said D'Artagnan, Porthos's objection is full of sense. What's going on in the town? Said Athos. They're beating to arms. The four friends listened, and the sound of the tattoo reached their ears. You will see, continued Athos, that they will send an entire regiment against us. You do not expect to hold your ground against an entire regiment, said Porthos. Why not? Replied the Musketeer. I feel myself in the humor and would hold it against an army if we had only the precaution to bring a dozen bottles more. Upon my word, the drum comes nearer, said D'Artagnan. Let it come, replied Athos. There is a quarter of an hour's march between the town and this place. It is more time than we shall require to arrange our plans. If we go away from here, we shall never again find such a convenient spot. And listen, gentlemen, the very idea has come into my mind. Let us hear it. Athos made a sign for his valet to come to him. Grimaud, said Athos, pointing to the dead bodies which lay in the bastion, you will take these gentlemen, fix them upright against the wall, put their hats on their heads, and place their muskets in their hands. Oh, great man, cried D'Artagnan, I understand you. You understand him? Said Porthos. And you, Grimaud, do you understand? Inquired Aramis. Grimaud gave a sign in the affirmative. It is all that is necessary, said Athos. Now let us return to my idea. I should like, however, to understand as well, said Porthos. It is of no use. Yes, the idea of Athos, said D'Artagnan and Aramis at the same time. This lady, this woman, this creature, this demon, has a brother-in-law, I think you told me. Yes, I even know him, and I believe that he has no great sympathy with his sister-in-law. There's no harm there, replied Athos, and if he detested her even, it would be so much the better. In that case, we are fitted to a nicety. Nevertheless, said Porthos, I should like to understand what Grimaud is about. Silence, Porthos, cried Aramis. What is the name of this brother-in-law? Lord de Winter. Where is he at present? He returned to London on the first report of the war. Well, there is exactly the man we want, said Athos. It is to him that we must give information. We must let him know that his sister-in-law is going to assassinate someone, and to entreat him to keep his eye upon her. There must be in London, I should hope, some establishment like the Madelinettes or the Magdalen. He must place his sister-in-law there, and we shall be at peace. Yes, said D'Artagnan, until she gets out again. Ah, faith, said Athos, you ask too much, D'Artagnan. I have given you all that I have, and I tell you that my budget is now empty. I think it is the best plan we can devise, observed Aramis. We will inform the Queen and Lord de Winter at the same time. But by whom shall we convey the one letter to London and the other to Tours? I answer for Bazin, replied Aramis. And I for Planchet, added D'Artagnan. In fact, said Porthos, if we cannot leave the camp, our lackeys can. Certainly, added Aramis, so we will write the letters on this very day, give them some money, and send them on the journey. We will give them some money, said Athos. Then you've got money, have you? The four friends looked at each other, and a cloud passed over the brows which had been for an instant brightened. Attention, cried D'Artagnan. I see black and red points in motion below there. What were you saying about a regiment, Athos? It's a regular army. Faith, yes, replied Athos. There they are. Do you see the crafty fellows who are advancing without drum or trumpet? Have you finished, Grimaud? Grimaud gave a sign in the affirmative and pointed to a dozen dead bodies, which he had placed in the most picturesque attitudes, some carrying arms, others seeming to take aim, others sword in hand. Bravo, cried Athos. That does credit to your imagination. That may be, said Porthos, and yet I should like to understand it. Let us decamp first, said D'Artagnan. You will understand afterwards. 1 moment, gentlemen. Wait 1 moment. Let us give Grimaud time to take away the breakfast things. Ah, said Aramis, here are the black and red points becoming visibly larger, and I am of D'Artagnan's opinion. I believe that we have no time to lose in regaining the camp. "Faith," said Athos, "I have nothing more to say against a retreat. We betted for an hour, and we have remained an hour and a half. There's nothing more to communicate. So let us be off, gentlemen, let us be off." Grimaud had already commenced his retreat with the basket and the fragments. The four friends followed behind him and had taken about a dozen steps when— "Ah, what the plague are we about, gentlemen?" exclaimed Athos. "Have you forgotten anything?" inquired Aramis. "The flag! Zounds, we must not leave a flag in the hands of the enemy, even though it be a napkin." And Athos rushed back into the bastion, mounted the platform, and took down the flag. But as the Rochelelois had come within musket shot, they opened a sharp fire upon this man, who thus exposed himself, as if for amusement, to their discharge. It might have been fancied, however, that Athos bore a charmed life. The bullets whistled around him, yet he stood unharmed. Athos waved his standard and bowed toward the camp as he turned his back on the town. Loud shouts resounded on both sides, shouts of anger from the one and from the other of enthusiasm. A second discharge soon followed the first, and 3 balls, by passing through the napkin, made a regular standard of it. They heard the whole camp exclaiming, "Come down, come down!" Athos slowly descended. His companions, who waited for him with anxiety, welcomed his reappearance with joy. "Come along, Athos, come along," said D'Artagnan. "Let us make haste. Now that we've found everything except money, it would be absurd to get killed." But Athos persisted in his majestic walk, and his companions, finding all remonstrance useless, regulated their pace by his. Grimaud and his basket had formed the advance guard, and were both soon out of range. After a minute or two, the quartet heard the sound of furious firing. "What is that?" asked Porthos. "At what are they firing? I do not hear the bullets whistle, nor do I see anybody." "They're firing at our dead men," replied Athos. "But our dead men will not return their fire." "Exactly so. They will then believe that there is an ambuscade. They will deliberate and will afterwards reconnoitre, and by that time they will discover the trick. We shall be beyond the reach of their fire. Thus, you see, it's unnecessary to give ourselves a fit of the pleurisy by overhaste." "Oh, I understand now," said the astonished Porthos. "That's very fortunate," replied Athos, shrugging his shoulders. The French, on their side, perceiving their adventurous comrades returning, uttered cries of enthusiasm. At length a fresh volley was heard, and this time the bullets were actually flattened on the stones around the 4 friends, and whistled mournfully about their ears. The Rochelelois had at last taken possession of the bastion. "They are a set of awkward fellows," remarked Athos. "How many of them have we shot? A dozen? Or 15? How many did we crush? 8 or 10. And in exchange for this we've not got a scratch. Ah, yes, though. What is the matter with your hand there, D'Artagnan? It bleeds, I think?" "It's nothing," replied D'Artagnan. Was it a spent ball?" "No." "What then?" We have said that Athos loved D'Artagnan as his own son, and though of a gloomy and inflexible character, he sometimes manifested toward the young man a solicitude truly paternal. "Merely a scratch," replied D'Artagnan. "I caught my fingers between 2 stones, that of the wall and that of my ring, and the skin is broken." "See what it is to wear diamonds, my master," said Athos contemptuously. "Ah," exclaimed Porthos, "there is a diamond, in fact, and why the plague, then, as there is a diamond, do we complain of having no money?" "See there now," said Aramis. "Well done, Porthos. This time you really have got an idea." "Certainly," continued Porthos, bridling up at Athos's compliment. "And since there is a diamond, let us sell it." "But," said D'Artagnan, "it is the Queen's diamond." "All the more reason," said Athos. "The Queen saving the Duke of Buckingham, her lover. Nothing can be more just. The Queen saving us, her friends. Nothing can be more moral. Let us sell the diamond. What does the Abbé say? I do not ask Porthos's opinion. That's already given." "Why, I think," said Aramis, blushing, "that as the ring does not come from a mistress, and consequently is not a love token, D'Artagnan may sell it." "My dear fellow, you speak like theology personified. So your advice is to sell the diamond," replied Aramis. "Well," said D'Artagnan gaily, "let us sell the diamond and say no more about it." The fusillade still continued, but the friends were beyond its range, and the Rocheleois seemed to be firing only for the satisfaction of their own consciences. "Faith," said Athos, "it was quite time for this idea of Porthos's to present itself. For here we are at the camp. So now, gentlemen, not another word about this business. We are observed, they are coming to meet us, and we shall be borne home in triumph." In fact, as we have already said, the whole camp was in commotion. More than 2,000 persons had witnessed at a theater the fortunate bravado of the four friends, a bravado of which they had been far from suspecting the true motive. Nothing could be heard but cries of "Long live the Guards" and "Long live the Musketeers." Monsieur de Busigny was the first who came to press the hand of Athos and to confess that he had lost his bet. The dragoon and the Swiss had followed him, and all their comrades had followed the dragoon and the Swiss. There was no end to the congratulations, shaking of hands, embraces, and inextinguishable laughter at the Rocheleois, and at last the tumult was so great that the cardinal supposed there was a mutiny, and sent La Houdinière, the captain of his guards, to ascertain the cause of the disturbance. The circumstance was related to his messenger with all the warmth of enthusiasm. "Well?" demanded the cardinal when he saw La Houdinière. "Well, my lord," replied the latter, "it is the Three Musketeers and a guardsman who laid a wager with Monsieur de Busigny to go and breakfast in the bastion of Saint-Gervais, and who, whilst at breakfast, maintained their ground for 2 hours against the Rocheleois, and killed I know not how many of the enemy. Did you learn the names of these musketeers?" "Yes, my lord." "What are they?" "Messieurs Athos, Porthos, and Aramis." "Always my 3 brave fellows," muttered the cardinal. "And the guardsman?" "Monsieur de D'Artagnan." "My young madcap again. Decidedly, these 4 men must be mine." On the same evening, the cardinal spoke to Monsieur de Tréville of the exploit, which formed the subject of conversation throughout the whole camp. Monsieur de Tréville, who heard the recital of the adventure from the lips of those who were its heroes, recounted it in all its particulars to his eminence, without forgetting the episode of the napkin. "Very good, Monsieur de Tréville," said the cardinal. "Give me this napkin, I beg of you. I will get 3 fleurs de lis embroidered on it in gold, and will give it to you as a standard for your company." "My lord," said Monsieur de Tréville, "that would be unjust toward the guards. Monsieur d'Artagnan does not belong to me, but to Monsieur des Essarts." "Well, then, take him," said the cardinal. "It is not fair that these 4 brave soldiers, who love each other so much, should not serve in the same company." On the same evening, Monsieur de Tréville announced this good news to the 3 Musketeers and to D'Artagnan, inviting them to breakfast with him on the morrow. D'Artagnan could not contain himself for joy. We know that the dream of his whole life had been to be a musketeer. The 3 friends were also much delighted. "Faith," said D'Artagnan to Athos, "yours was a triumphant idea, and as you said, we have gained glory by it, besides being able to hold a conversation of the greatest importance, which we may henceforth renew without suspicion, for with God's help we shall henceforth be regarded as cardinalists." On the same evening, D'Artagnan went to pay his respects to Monsieur des Essarts, and to inform him of his promotion. Monsieur des Essarts, who had great affection for D'Artagnan, offered him any assistance that he might require, as this change of regiment brought with it new expenses of equipment. D'Artagnan declined this assistance, but, thinking the opportunity a good one, requested him to ascertain the value of the diamond, which he placed in his hands, stating that he wished to turn it into money. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Monsieur des Essarts' valet came to D'Artagnan, and handed to him a bag containing 7,000 livres in gold. It was the price of the Queen's diamond.